I got chills, they're multiplying, and I'm losing control. 'Cause this horror that I'm watching, it's terrifying. Better shape up, because we're talking horror musicals at the Horror Movie Syllabus. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video that we've got linked down in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of how the Horror Movie Syllabus works and what we're all about, but in short, what we're going to do is take a look at a specific subgenre of horror and then pick 3 representative examples of that subgenre to examine. Today, the subgenre that we're looking at is the horror musical. And right off the bat, I need to be honest and upfront with you guys. I hate musicals. I am not a fan of a musical. I have a disproportionate adverse reaction to them. The idea of somebody breaking out into song in the middle of a scene to express themselves is just so bizarre to me and takes me out of the narrative almost every time. It's really something that I have a hard time getting into. And that's not to say that I dislike all musicals. There are a few that I find charming or even catchy or even actually enjoy and would watch them, willingly. But by and large, musical equals Professor Victor being out. Which makes talking about this subgenre a little bit challenging because I want to be as fair and balanced as I can be. But my bias is almost certainly going to seep into this. And I'll try to be upfront about that when it's happening. Now, the horror musical in and of itself is interesting because it shouldn't really work. The idea of a movie that's meant to scare you suddenly breaking out into song and dance seems counterintuitive. It seems like that would defeat the mission of trying to scare you. And you're not wrong if you're feeling that way, because by and large, horror musicals aren't very scary. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be entertaining or interesting or even maybe give you a sense of some sort of horror or terror or dread. But for the most part, it's hard to be scared when your killer is doing a soft shoe or singing a ditty. So you can understand how there could be some challenges in getting the horror musical to be horror. That might lend itself to the question of why does the horror musical even exist? And I think the reason why it does is simply because the musical genre, not unlike the horror genre, is really made up of a bunch of subgenres. You've got the musical romance, musical comedy, musical drama, historical drama. There's all kinds of different types of musicals. And so horror musical just seems like it would naturally follow. And so I don't begrudge the horror musical subgenre because there is an audience for it. Clearly, there's a lot of horror musical. I didn't really want to put this on the syllabus for the obvious reasons, but I couldn't ignore it. There's so many prominent or interesting horror musicals that it had to be discussed. And so in order to be something of a completionist, in order to get a full, well-rounded and balanced horror syllabus, I needed to include it. And so that brings us to today, where we're going to talk about horror musicals. And I've picked movies today that I generally like, or at least don't hate, and that I think are worth mentioning and have some merit. So I'm going to do my best to show what I think is the best of a horror musical, and not just harp on how annoying musicals can be. I think I've done enough of that for this video, but we'll see what happens. Today we're going to be organizing the movies in undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate categories, with them being just in the order of chronology, like the order that they came out, because I didn't really want to try to rank them or anything like that. And of course we'll have some extra credit ones at the end of the video. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. The first horror musical we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Little Shop of Horrors. Little Shop of Horrors came out in 1986, and it's based on the off-Broadway musical, which is also based off of the 1960 Roger Corman film of the same name, which is a little bit confusing, I know, but we'll muddle through somehow. Uh, the movie's directed by Frank Oz, who, if you don't know, plays Yoda and Miss Piggy, amongst many other voices, and stars Rick Moranis and Steve Martin, amongst others. And it's generally a lot of fun. If you're not familiar with the story, in short, it's about a nerdy botanist played by Rick Moranis, who has a crush on the girl he works at a flower shop, and the flower shop's failing, and he comes across a Venus flytrap that's rather unusual, and is getting enough attention to make the flower shop successful. And the Venus flytrap needs human blood in order to grow. So Rick Moranis' character is torn between feeding this monster to try to get a fame and fortune and get the girl, or trying to do the right thing. It's an interesting concept. It's kind of not something you would have ever seen before, or at least not something I'd ever seen before. And it's kind of a fresh and original idea, even though, again, it's actually a remake from a 1960 film that I haven't seen. I remember seeing this when it came out, so I would have been 11-ish when it came out, and I really enjoyed it. And this was admittedly probably before I had such a bias against musicals in general. I'm still probably just coming out of the Disney phase, and Disney movies tend to be musicals, so I'm probably perfectly fine with musicals as a medium for telling stories at the time. And admittedly, the songs in the movie are largely catchy. I remember some of them to this day, even though it's not like I revisit Little Shop of Horrors frequently or anything. So I do think that as far as musicals go, it's a solid one. Again, it's it was an off-Broadway play, a musical, after the original movie was made, which I don't think was a musical. So it's got a bona fide pedigree of musical theater behind it. And the performances are good. It's a fun take, a fun story, but also a surprisingly gruesome one. The idea of this man-eating carnivorous plant, and the man who is feeding it in order to further his own personal gain is, it's not the most complex of stories, but it's a surprisingly dark one considering the bright colors and the fun musical aspect of it. So that might be part of what appeals to me about it, is that it is darker than you would have expected it to be by looking at, say, the poster, or looking at scenes from the movie, the trailer, or whatever. It's also pretty funny. It's got a pretty good balance of horror and comedy in there, along with the music. So by and large, everything's working. It's paced fairly well. It's making a good use of the music. It's not when the musical numbers hit, it doesn't feel like it stops the show. That's something that I tend to have a big problem with musicals, is that I feel like things kind of stop when the songs hit, and the narrative stops and things kind of slow down. And that doesn't really happen in Little Shop of Horrors. It actually keeps moving fairly well, I think. And I don't know. I find it charming. I find it an enjoyable, likable, affable enough time. I don't think it's a complex or dark or gritty or emotionally moving movie, but it's fun. It's an enjoyable time. I enjoy this movie. In fact, when people ask me, do you really hate musicals? This is usually one that I'll mention as one that is an example of, well, I don't hate all musicals. I don't hate Little Shop of Horrors. I actually like this one. This is a movie that if you said, hey, let's watch it, I'd be fine with it. So while I might not throw it in myself, I'm perfectly happy to watch it. So I felt like this is probably a good place to start the conversation, a good choice for our undergraduate level selection, and a good movie for you to watch if you are new to horror musicals or trying to get into it. This is probably a pretty good place to start. It's a good entry level horror musical movie, and one that I would actually bona fide recommend without caveat. I would say check out Little Shop of Horrors, full stop. The next movie that we're going to discuss, our graduate level selection, is Stage Fright. Stage Fright came out in 2014, and it's a surprising little horror musical slasher film, which is not something you see every day, and is part of probably a big reason why it's making the syllabus today. If you're not familiar with the movie, it follows the story of two siblings whose mother was a famous Broadway performer who was murdered, and they're going off to theater camp. And the theater camp is putting on a performance of the musical that their mother was performing in when she was murdered, and they want to try out, or the daughter wants to try out for the musical, and there's a killer on the loose. And of course, we'll stop there so not to spoil the movie too much, but it's surprisingly fun. I saw this movie on Netflix. It was one of these movies where I was visiting my in-laws for the holidays, and my in-laws live in a different time zone, so it's a couple hours ahead where they live, and that means I already stay up late, and when I'm there, I wind up staying really late because again they're a couple hours ahead, so I'm often up till like 3, 4 in the morning because I just can't adjust my clock. And so what I wind up doing is watching Netflix, with my headphones on, so not to disturb everybody who's sleeping, and I'll just watch random movies. And this one was one that I started watching, and it was, it was a slasher film. So I threw it on, and I had no idea when I threw it on that it was going to be a musical. So I'm watching it, and it starts out pretty strong, and then the singing started, and I was caught off guard. I had not expected that, and I almost turned it off right then. I was just like, oh hell no. But I stuck with it, and I'm glad I did because the movie is, like I said, it's surprisingly fun. And the reason why is because it is a genuine slasher film. While there's the musical aspects of it, it has slasher style kills, and I'm a big fan of the slasher genre, as you know, because you've watched the slasher video, right? So I'm kind of I'm easily won over by a slasher film. I have a lot of tolerance for it. I can stomach even the cheesiest of slasher films. So I'm predisposed to like this already. So even though there's musical aspects to it, I'm good. I'm gonna roll with it, and I'm glad I did because the kills are pretty good. They're pretty graphic and violent. The killer and his mask is really really cool and creepy. It's a pretty good design. The kind of thing that honestly they probably could have franchised out because he's a really cool looking killer, and he's got a really cool voice. Because of course the killer does sing, and I was just saying a few minutes ago that it's hard to be scary when the killer breaks into song and dance, and that's not false. But this guy has kind of like a heavy metal voice, like a rock and roll voice, which helps lend it a little bit more fear or scariness. It doesn't really undercut his menace so much, so that worked pretty well. It's also a pretty good voice, and it works. If you like rock music, pretty strong voice. The songs overall are forgettable. They're not all that great, but I didn't hate them. They weren't cringeworthy or cringe inducing or anything like that. They were fine. And interestingly, as the movie goes on, there are less songs. But one of the things that makes the songs work well is that the setting is theater camp, and they're putting on a musical. So in a way, it kind of makes sense that the characters break into song because they all have this theater background. If you've ever spent any time around theater nerds, and I have, they're inclined to do weird stuff like that. So it didn't seem totally bizarre the characters would break out into song. So there's sort of a narrative reason for the songs. It's not really, I mean, it's a musical, but having that explanation helps a little bit. Like, I've mentioned it many times. I'm a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They were one of the first TV shows to do a musical episode, and I actually liked that quite a bit. And part of the reason why is in that episode, there's a narrative explanation for why everybody is singing. Stage Fright doesn't quite go that far, but it's a similar idea. There is a narrative reason or a narrative explanation for why people might break into song. It's not really, doesn't really hold water, but it's enough to get my mind past the why is everybody singing question and just get into the story. The story itself is fine. It's fairly rote for a slasher movie, but again, I don't mind that because I like a good slasher movie, and I do think this is a pretty good one. It's got a couple of noteworthy faces, namely Minnie Driver and Meatloaf. Meatloaf, who is always fun, and so the singing is good. The songs, again, they're not particularly memorable or catchy, but they're perfectly fine. They work in the movie, and the kills are the main reason why this movie made the list. Like, I really had a lot of fun watching this as a slasher film, more than like a musical. To me, this was like a slasher film first, and incidentally a musical, but it is a musical. So I figured I'd put it here. just because I don't think a lot of people have heard about it. I know that it doesn't have the strongest reputation, hence why they didn't bother trying to franchise it and turn that killer into like a slasher icon. But it's unfortunate because I think this is one of the better horror musicals. At least this is one of the ones that I enjoyed more. Now, again, we all know my bias. I've explained it at length now, but if I could get into this, I would think anybody get into it, especially if you like slashers. If you like slasher movies, this is definitely one to check out, and I think you would enjoy it. So if you haven't seen it, check it out and let me know what you think. And the last movie that we're talking about today, the postgraduate selection, is Anna and the Apocalypse. Anna and the Apocalypse came out in 2017, and it is a Christmas set zombie musical. And that's three things right off the bat that should be a red flag for me, things that I don't particularly care for all that much. Um, and yet, this movie won me over. If you haven't seen it before, Anna and the Apocalypse is the story of a young high school girl who's getting ready to move on, and her father, who's a little overprotective, and the plans that she and her friends have post high school, and the zombie apocalypse hits, as you know it does, and they have to find a way to survive. I'm leaving out a ton of stuff there because I don't want to spoil the movie too much, of course, but um, there's a lot of subplots going on, a lot of side characters going on, and a lot of hijinks abounding, as I like to say. But you get the idea. The movie's a UK movie. Of course, it's in English, but they've got accents and whatnot, and it's got a little bit of a UK sensibility. But for the most part, it's got a universal theme. Everybody can relate to being in high school and kind of the different high school dramas that you wind up in and the fears of the future and things like that. And so I think this movie plays into that fairly well. And of course, the zombie apocalypse motif and everybody come together and survive is a fairly well worn trope in horror that it works. It's probably been overdone at this point, and there's been every combination of zombie film imaginable. So zombie musical or zombie Christmas musical doesn't feel as fresh and original as maybe you think it should or would, but it still works. And I think the reason why is because it just has a certain charm to it. Now, part of the charm of the movie comes from the actors, in particular the lead, Ella Hunt, who I'm not familiar with. I would just call her Discount Anna Kendrick. And I'll be honest with you, had Anna Kendrick played the role, I probably would have enjoyed this movie immensely. I would probably be raving about it, but alas, she's probably technically too old for that role. But Ella Hunt has a certain charm to her. She can sing for sure, and the rest of the cast behind her all have their charm. They're all kind of caricatures, but they're likable. They're intriguing enough, and they're enough. There's enough there for you to latch onto or identify with. And I do think that's a big crux as to what makes the movie work. I actually cared about these characters. I wanted them to survive. I wanted to see what was going to happen to their lives. I wanted to see how the dramas would play out and how some of the dramas persisted, even though the zombie apocalypse had happened. So I got invested enough in the characters. I'll credit the actors with that a lot because, again, the script is not anything revolutionary or different other than the musical aspect to it. But the actors pulled it off. The actors had enough likability to make me invest in them and make me engage in them. Now, the music itself is fine. The songs are honestly a little forgettable. I couldn't hum a single one of them right now. And I just rewatched this movie not too long ago, and I couldn't tell you a single song. And in fact, this is one of those movies where I kind of feel like I wish it wasn't a musical. I feel like the songs kind of stopped the show a little bit. I didn't feel like they added anything to it. There was no narrative reason for them to burst into song other than the fact that it's a musical. And it didn't enhance anything. In fact, it kind of felt like it slowed things down a little bit. I think I probably would have really liked this movie if it didn't have the musical aspect. If it was just a straight Christmas themed zombie movie, I probably would have enjoyed it more, even though it probably wouldn't be as much of a standout. And that's the thing, and that's why it's making it onto the syllabus proper, is that this movie hit for a lot of people. It was extremely popular when it came out, and it came just a couple of years ago, so it made a big noise when it hit. It had a lot of buzz behind it. Now, that buzz seems to have died down a little bit, so it remains to be seen whether or not this movie truly has legs, but I think it will. I think it's the kind of movie that might get revisited over the holidays, things like that. But the fact that I don't find the music very memorable might be an Achilles heel for it. And only time will tell. I have talked to other people who like musicals who have seen this movie and liked it quite a bit. but they seem to agree with me that the music isn't super memorable. And if it's not memorable, it makes me wonder if this movie will endure. I decided to put it on the syllabus because the reputation is really strong and because I did enjoy it. But with the caveat that it's possible that this movie could get bumped off of the syllabus in the future in favor of something else if it turns out to wind up being ultimately a flash in the pan that gets forgotten. I hope that's not the case. I do think it's well made. I do think, again, that the acting in particular is very strong and that the characters are likable. And it's a fun time. I didn't find myself to be bored in the movie at all. I didn't find myself annoyed with it. I didn't find myself disliking it. I didn't find myself tapping my toes either, but I did enjoy it. And I think you would too. So if you haven't seen it, give it a chance. Check it out and see what you think of it. And of course, tell all of us in the comments what you think. So those are our three selections for the horror musical subgenre, but here are a few extra credit movies that I felt were worth noting and worth talking about, if not necessarily worth watching. The first movie that I'm going to bring up is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And that's probably a movie you might be familiar with. And I am here to tell you that I hate this movie. If you're not familiar with the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the movie is about a couple that has their car break down, and when they're out looking for a phone, they come across this castle full of people that are having some sort of weird convention, and they're all in weird costumes and stuff. And the owner of the house is a self-described transsexual mad scientist who is creating kind of like a Frankenstein monster. In fact, the character's name is Frank Anfurter, Dr. Frank Anfurter. Um, the plot is it's almost not even worth telling you what the plot's about because it's not important. Like the movie is nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, which is part of why I can't stand it. I am aware that that's the point. Fans of this movie, and there are many, will tell me that the point of the movie is that it's a parody of horror and sci-fi movies from like the 50s schlocky horror and sci-fi movies. I understand that. I get it. I just don't think it's funny. I don't think it's interesting. I don't think it's. I don't get it. You know, and we've talked a little bit before. My particular my comedy sensibilities are very particular. There's a lot of things that just don't hit for me. Rocky Horror Picture Show is definitely one of them. It just does not hit for me at all. My ex-wife was a big fan of the movie and introduced me to it, and that's not why I hate it. Let me just be clear; it has nothing to do with her. It's just not for me at all. And I think part of why I really have a visceral reaction to it, I really strongly dislike, is because other people love it so much, and that's why I'm mentioning it here. I couldn't bear to put it on the syllabus. I just couldn't do it, but it's got a massive cult following, and they all get together to see midnight screenings of it and dress up in costumes and shout at the screen and do all the lines and throw forks and stuff at it, or wear spoons. I don't know. It's all this weird ritual thing that I don't understand. I don't get the appeal of it. I don't understand it all, but people love it, and that's awesome. I don't begrudge these people having a good time. I have a lot of friends that are into this who do the dressing up and stuff like that and get into it. It's not for me, but I'm glad that people love it. I'm not here to decry it or say you shouldn't watch it or whatever. I can't get into it at all. And I think that, and people have told me this, that if you really want to appreciate it, you have to go and see it live. I don't know that I'd recommend that. I don't know. I did not find that to be a fun experience, but if you want to give it a fair shake, that is the way to do it, apparently. I get that. I get that the interactive experience is part of it. I get that it's cheesy and that everybody who likes it knows this. It just doesn't connect with me at all. It's not for me. And here's the thing. It's got some good aspects to it. I mean, it's got Tim Curry in the lead, and he is, as always, fantastic. It's got Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick, who are both very good. Meatloaf, again, it's got Meatloaf in it. Again, Meatloaf is always fun, and he's actually fun here. He's probably the one part of the movie I actually enjoy is when he shows up. But overall, the movie, it's so weird, man. It's so weird and kind of annoying. But I will give it one other compliment. The music is catchy. It's memorable. It's catchy. I could actually hum a couple of the songs right now and sing a few lyrics of them. Partly because they're kind of in the cultural lexicon. They're very famous, and so there's that. But I will admit the songs are good. They are catchy. So I'll give it that. But man, it's just not for me. It's not for me at all. I really like Pet Cemetery level. Don't like this movie. I really get frustrated by it. I really can't stand it. But I acknowledge that it's important. I acknowledge that the popularity is so strong that apparently it's the longest running movie in theaters ever. It's 40 some odd years and counting, coming on 50 years of going on in theaters and still being played in theaters. So respect, that's something that's noteworthy and worth acknowledging and appreciating. So I will tip my hat to it, even though I just really don't like it. It's really not for me. For those of you who love Rocky Horror Picture Show, I salute you guys for keeping that thing alive and making it as popular as it is, making it endure. Kudos to you guys. Kudos to the film for having such a strong and rabid fan base. There's no hatred from me towards you guys. Just don't like this movie at all. It just really just rubs me the wrong way. So I'm not recommending you watch it, but if you do love it, let us know in the comments below how much you love it and why you love it and why people should go check it out. The next censor movie I'm going to bring up is Cannibal the Musical. And Cannibal the Musical came out in 1993, and it's the movie about a real life. It's a musical movie about a real life cannibal, a man who went on a expedition with a bunch of people, a bunch of men from Utah, settlers to go to Colorado, and they encountered a bunch of trouble and got lost, and they wound up cannibalizing themselves, and he was the only survivor. And this is his tale, which sounds like a very dark story, but of course this musical aspect of it is not dark at all. The thing is, the movie is borderline unwatchable. It's incredibly terrible. The production values are bad. The songs are hard to get through. They're really rough. The acting is bad. Pretty much everything is bad. A couple of the jokes land, but most of them don't. But it's phenomenally bad on every level. So why in the world would I be bringing it up here in extra credit? Well, the reason why is because it's made by two guys named Trey Parker and Matt Stone. Those names might be familiar to you if you're a fan of the show South Park or of the musical Book of Mormon, because they are the creators of both of those. They have very strong fan bases. Both the show South Park and the musical Book of Mormon have very strong fan bases. As a result, Parker and Stone are a very popular, well-known, and well-loved comedy duo. This movie is the movie that they make in film school, or right after film school. It's very early. It's like basically their first movie. So from a cultural standpoint, from a historical standpoint, this movie becomes very, very interesting because it's the origins of South Park and Book of Mormon. There are Mormon characters in the movie, and they're going to Colorado, and you can see the seeds of where South Park and Book of Mormon come. That's where they sprout from. That's the origins of it. So in that sense, it was kind of a fascinating watch. Like the movie itself, on its own, on its merits, awful. But it's interesting as a kind of an artifact to look at, kind of examine, to see the inklings of these other much more interesting ideas. Because I do enjoy South Park, I will admit. Seeing kind of just the beginnings of that, and so like hearing some of the voices that would become like Cartman and things like that, and some of the jokes that would become like South Park style jokes was really interesting. The other thing that's interesting about this for me, and I didn't know it until I did a little bit of research on it, is that the movie is made after I think it's Parker, his fiance has left him for another man in real life, and in the movie, he names his horse after his ex, and the horse leaves him. And so there's a whole running subplot about the horse leaving him for another man, and how much he hates the horse. And it doesn't make any damn sense whatsoever unless you know that that's all about his ex-fiance. And so that made it kind of funny when you know that information. Without it, it's completely inane and boring and makes no sense whatsoever. That meta knowledge is what gives it some flavor. But then you realize what this is a film project. It's a film project where a guy is basically working out his demons about his ex-fiance on screen for you to watch, which is just so weird and so bizarre. But when you think about things like South Park and how they just kind of make whole episodes based on things that are bugging them. Again, it's the origins of that style of comedy for them. This was him dealing with his breakup by basically making his ex fiancee a horse and then criticizing her throughout the movie. So weird, so weird, and kind of awkward. But I tip the hat to the guy for putting his personal business up on the screen for everybody to see. So as a result, this movie is something of a cult favorite, and by cult I mean like just fans of Parker and Stone care about this. It's very popular in Colorado because they know that history behind it, the true story that's behind it. Again, rather dark history, really not played dark at all in the movie, but it's got a local following to it. But as Parker and Stone have become more and more famous, this movie's been given the cult treatment. It's gotten the release, the special edition release on home media and stuff like that. So it's got its followers. I'm not recommending you watch it. Unless you really love South Park or Book of Mormon, like you really like that stuff. If you really like one of those, then you might find this interesting from like a historical perspective, just kind of like seeing the origins of things. But that's the only real value in it. Otherwise, oh man, it's bad. I mean, my wife walked in while I was watching this, and she's like, "What are you watching?" And I'm like, "It's horrible, but I need to do this for the syllabus." So that's my caveat on it. Go at your own risk. And the last movie that we're going to be talking about is Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. And this movie almost made the syllabus. In fact, for a long time it was on the syllabus, and I kind of shuffled it around a little bit because I kind of wanted to talk about the other movies on the syllabus a little bit more. But this movie is actually quite good. If you're not familiar with it, it's based on the Stephen Sondheim Broadway musical, and it's directed by Tim Burton. It stars Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, and it's the story of a barber who slits the throats of his customers, and they wind up turning them into meat pies. Wonderfully dark and bleak, and actually quite good. The singing, the musical aspect of it actually works pretty well. Again, I'm not a musical fan, so I'm neither here nor there about Sondheim, but I do recognize the name. I know that he's a big deal. The songs are catchy here. The songs are good. I can sing along to some of them. They are fun. And again, while it's not there's not really a narrative reason or explanation for the singing in there. The songs do kind of propel the narrative along a bit, and again, you tap your toes to them. They're good. The performances are good. Johnny Depp in particular is quite good in this one. Now, if you're familiar with Tim Burton and Johnny Depp, you're kind of familiar with what you're going to get here. The aesthetic is that Tim Burton aesthetic that he does in like all of his movies. Like my friend can't stand Tim Burton because all the movies look alike, and hey, that just makes him an auteur, right? Like I don't have a problem with his aesthetic, but I do admit that it's getting a little long in the tooth. So if you haven't seen this movie and you go back to watch it, you might feel like you've seen a lot of this before. But it's well made, it's well directed, it's very well acted. It's got a very cool look, and I do like the bleak and gruesome nature of the story. That was one of the things that won me over to it quite a bit. Was it's a musical that's really pretty dark and pretty gruesome, and I do dig that a little bit. It's worth noting that this movie has not only is it famous for being a musical, but it's also famous in pop culture because it pops up in other pop culture references. There was an episode of The Office, if you ever watched that TV show, where one of the characters was acting in the show Sweeney Todd, and they have some of the songs from Sweeney Todd in it. There was also a movie called Jersey Girl. It's a Kevin Smith movie. It's a romantic comedy, and there's a little girl in there who is gonna do a song from Sweeney Todd in the school play, and she's gonna slit people's throats and stuff like that. It's got kind of a cultural significance to it that goes a little bit beyond the musical world or the musical theater world. So it's got some legs. And so, like I said, if one of the other movies gets bumped off the syllabus, this is the one that's gonna slide right on in there. It was in there previously. And right now, I slightly regret not having it in the syllabus because I do think it's very, very good, and I like it quite a bit. But I had things I wanted to say about the other ones a little bit more, so I just shuffled it around. But I definitely think that this is one that you should definitely check out, especially if you do like Johnny Depp, if you do like Tim Burton, if you do like kind of gruesome stuff, or if you like musicals. All of these things are good. Now, caveat one thing is if you're familiar with the Sondheim musical, if you've seen that, if you're a big fan of that, I'm told by my friends who love musicals that the singing in this movie is not anywhere near on to par with the Broadway singing. Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter, they're not Broadway singers, so there's that. So that's the one caveat. If you're a big fan of the musical, go in with reduced expectations in regards to the singing. But I definitely would recommend this one very much. I do think it's a good one to watch. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. And that's going to do it for our exploration into the horror musical today. Hopefully, I was able to give a somewhat fair and honest look at horror musicals without my bias seeping in too much. It's not my favorite subgenre, and one of my least favorite subgenres, really. So I tried to be upfront and honest about that and try to give it a fair shake. For those of you that do love musicals in general and horror musicals in particular, I really would hope that you defend in the comments below. Give us your diatribes on why horror musicals are awesome and why people should check them out. I don't want to just be too one-sided here, so I'm kind of counting on you guys to step up and decry your love for the horror musical and give us some suggestions that I might not have touched on in this video, because I don't want to turn people off to horror musicals, and I'm hoping I didn't do that. My biases are my biases, and I'm hoping that people can get into something about this horror musical. At least the ones that I've mentioned here, by and large, are ones that I would recommend and think are very good. So if you have additional ones that you think are worth checking out, please leave those in the comments. I'm really enjoying you guys' comments and participation. So again, thanks for that, and thanks in advance for giving us some other stuff to think about when it comes to the horror musical. With that, we're going to wrap it up for this week. So if you got a song stuck in your head, my apologies on that, but hopefully you guys have a great week until we get together for next week's video. Until then, class dismissed.